I know there are two of you, but it only says one. But it's gratifying how quickly you come. I'm always grateful for that. This is basically a review of what transpired yesterday when Ralph, it was mainly Ralph that said the things that I really want to talk about. Domingo joined, and so did Levent Yildiz. Yes, Ralph and I had a ding-dong about why I thought it was ironic, really, that he was sort of doing his, oh, I must protect these poor white people from you, Claire. And he kind of sort of did this Jada Franson thing, when she brought that enormous cross to frighten that Muslim shopkeeper. And I guess Ralph was using that cross to try to beat me off. But I thought it was ironic that it should be me and Ralph fighting for the hearts and minds of Western man. For some reason, Ralph and I are the most energetic, I think, and possibly the most innovative, as far as I know, and energetic in fighting for the hearts and minds of Western men who despair of their governments. Ralph repeatedly accused me of being anti-white, and I really must protest at this unjust accusation. Obviously I care about white people, or, well, I just wouldn't be here. I wouldn't do anything of the things I do if I didn't care. But I care about other people too. So I suppose different people will accuse me of not caring about their group enough, or being hostile to their group. But I like to think that what I do would be the actions of a just and judicious ruler. I would have no favourites, not even the majority. I would just try to be fair. And there is, in a nation, citizens containing the majority and the minority, the young and the old, the men and the women, the rich and the poor. And all their interests have to be balanced against other groups in order to govern in the national interest. And I was and will continue to be insistent that the definition of the national interest has to be, the definition of nationalism has to be government in the national interest. It can't be, for the indigenous people who are white, blah, blah. And no, it can't be that. So this is what I'd have to do if I were to govern in the national interest, and even if the majority of the people are white, I would have to think of the national interest as an abstraction. It can't be, the interests of any group, be they male or female, young or old, rich or poor, majority or minority. I have to judiciously balance the interests of the competing groups. And it wouldn't just be the people the interests of the people currently in existence in the nation. I would have to govern in the interest of future generations. And that would be my brief. So I can't be favouring, one group over the other because I want to win their votes or something. I think the reason why so many governments are so terrified of pissing off pensioners is because they know that pensioners won't forget to vote. They won't, plan to vote and then get distracted going to some music festival or go on holiday or something. And that's why they're terrified of pensioners who tend to hang around for a long time. But it's not how any country should be governed, really. It shouldn't be, whoever has the most voting power, because their interests are not necessarily the ones that are in harmony with the long-term national interest. And of course, future generations are descendants of any won't have a vote at all. And their interests have to be considered. And it is for this reason that I am quite insistent on nationalism being defined as government in the national interest. And I know people think, I want to make nationalism about the national interest because I don't care about white people and I want to marginalise them or something of that nature. And I do assure you it's not like that. And I think this would be the case whatever country I govern. Will I be given an option to govern this country or another country? These would be the principles of good government, that you promote the national interest and you plan for the future and consider the interests of the people whom you will never meet because they will be your descendants. And the purpose of this is to be considered responsible custodians of the national interest. So we don't want to do this terrible thing of leaving the world with an unflushed or overflowing toilet. That is what it would be disgraceful for us to do, and I fear that many boomers will be seen in this light. And many millennials are just beginning to realise how much of their inheritance their parents have spent. So while race is still being touted around as a red herring, the real divisions, the real conflict is not interracial at all, but generational. When this generation of white people realise how irresponsible the previous generation of white people have been, they will be quite angry, I think. And so it is important that people of boomers need to acknowledge what they have done, rather than get very angry when people vote Trump as a protest against all the neoliberal and neoconservative policies that they never supported and never wanted. I think the egalitarianism that is compulsory in the West is not working well because it's hypocritical. People are not equal. people born of a lower class having parents who don't quite such as much as our parents are obviously at a disadvantage, and this must be acknowledged. If they didn't go to a good school, all the disadvantages of that flow from not having had our opportunities, and it's just not a good idea to sneer at people who haven't had your opportunities, and I'm afraid people have lost sight of that. And I know it's quite easy for graduates to dance around words while calling people who didn't go to a good school racist for using the wrong word. So I'm talking about these divisions really, rather than the racial ones, because ultimately a lot of non-whites voted for Brexit, and they were Asian, and they were Muslim, and they were tired of immigration too. But it being the case that those who identify themselves as nationalists are people at the bottom of the social strata, at the bottom of society, that I don't think they have the ability to interest people in the classes above them in their problems, because they would, I suppose, understandably only want to consider their problems and not be terribly interested in the problems of other groups. This is only natural, I suppose, but the people who represent nationalism now do not have the stature, either ethically or educationally, to be seen as people who can be trusted to be fair to the other groups. That is ultimately what I'm trying to say. And what is this to do with Yom Kippur? Well, I wish they would repent. I wish they would repent of their narrow-mindedness, their uncooperativeness, of their refusal to engage in dialogues to do with the definition of nationalism. So I know that certain nationalists that I know point blank won't talk about the definition of nationalism. I mean, there's no need for me to look to them. I mean, they're not moral or political philosophers or anything of the sort. The best people for me to talk to would be academics, in politics departments at Russell Group universities, I guess. But their inability to engage is also a sign of their low status and low character. It's an attitude, I think, of the lower classes to, if they don't want to help you, I mean, they'll just, withdraw their cooperation. I mean, that's all they can do, really, because they know they can't, start an insurrection because they're so disorganised. And we do live in a society of beta males who are really only, men. No, what am I trying to say? Women with penis extensions, because they think like women. They won't take risks because basically they're atheists, and atheists don't take risks because they regard it as a failure if they suffer after defending a principle. So with that kind of attitude, you're never going to win, are you? And added to all of that, you're not having children, and don't want them either. And even if you did, you would be unmarriageable. And those above us will just mock those below them. And there is no conception even of governing the national interest. The political and intellectual discourse does not contemplate this discussing ideas at all. So it's very difficult for me, but I have to tell you, what the problem is and why I have to go beyond nationalism to get things done. And obviously, when you know you're dealing with the lowest of the low, you think that, well, the answer must be to go to the political establishment, and then you discover how incompetent and corrupt they are, and then you think, well, the only thing that would save us up now is, well, providence, fortune, some higher authority, some higher power that is able to move mountains and change minds in a way that I have clearly been unable to do. And obviously these would be the religious groups of the Abrahamic faith. The first port of call for me would be Christians, until I realised how hopeless they were and how divided. And then when you talk to the Muslims, they'll say, poor us, we're just, second-class citizens, immigrants, just fresh off the boat. We are ourselves a divided bunch, and we hate each other. Don't expect us to do anything for you because we've got enough problems of our own. That's what the Muslims say. And I went to the Jews, and they're basically saying, we're terrified of offending our Christian overlords, so we won't say so in so many words, but we're not going to stick our necks out. And so what we're left with is what's a good analogy? Lego bricks on the floor. And a child that doesn't want to play with them and won't be, putting them together or making anything with them. The child is not interested. But what would work in theory, I think, is the Jews do what they're supposed to do and teach the Noahide laws properly for a change. Because once they do that, a chain of events will be put in motion that will solve all the problems. And obviously, someone of their number will have to do the required thing. And so far they're not doing it. But I hope today, well, the next day, it's supposed to be a 25-hour fast. I'm not fasting. But it should have begun at, dusk. And go on till tomorrow, plus 1 hour. In the meantime, they are to reflect on their life, their year, and what they might have done wrong, because tomorrow they will go to synagogue, they will hear the shofar, and they will be told that all the promises to God that they made in the past year will be wiped clean. So if they want to renew it, they will have to renew their promises. Or if they think, though that particular promise should be cancelled, then it should be cancelled. I think it's a very effective way of making you do your year in review and think, what are those promises I made to God? were they wise promises? Would I like to be let off from them, or would I like to affirm them and continue with them? And when you see how the mechanics of this religion works, you'll see why they're smarter than Gentiles. I mean, what do Christians do? They eat Easter eggs. They eat chocolate eggs at Easter. They eat turkey at Christmas. Most Christians don't get the Trinity. They don't care. They don't care that it's idolatry. And obviously that's because they're atheists anyway. But the conversation, the exchange, the heated exchange I had with Ralph last night was interesting, because he was hurling himself like a mad dog at me to protect, white people and Christians, and saying, stay away from our Trinity, our precious Trinity. So we had a discussion about it, and I think he tried to prove that I was being silly for not understanding the Trinity. And I'll try and tell you what I remember of our exchange. And he was saying, now if God were to enter humanity as a man, what would he do? And of course it was a trick question. I mean, of course he would have to enter as a man. And my response was, why would he? Why would he do such a thing? It's not necessary for God to turn himself into a man to, consort with us. And we're not to think of God as a man, because it's just silly, because if you think of God as a dying Jew on a stick, you're not going to be scared of him, right? And when you think of the kind of life Jesus was alleged to have lived, I can't remember whether it was Ed Dutton or Richard Spencer who called him a sexless virgin loser. And the fact is, if you asked any nationalist whose life he would rather live, Muhammad's or Jesus, I think you know what he would choose. Islamophobe though he be, nobody wants to live the life of Jesus and have it ended that way, even if it meant all those people worshipping you as a co-equal of God. Because do you know what the Jews would do to him if they could? It would be the death penalty for inciting a community to practice idolatry. So it'd be quite interesting if to see such a trial. Perhaps one day it'll be dramatised in a play. But if Jews could get hold of Paul and Jesus and thought they could get away with it, it would be death for those two. I'm pretty sure. That's how much they don't like the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity. Now Ralph has set himself up as a protector of Christianity and calls me anti-white. I refuse to be identified as somebody who's pro or anti a colour. It would be as ridiculous as being pro vanilla ice cream and anti chocolate ice cream. That would be ridiculous. What I'm doing is choosing the best religion possible for the country I am living in. And you may be surprised to hear that it is a religion that it's not religion, sorry, legal system that I would commend to, well, any country all over the world. And, so it's not, me saying secular Quranism for you, but not for China, not for Israel, not for, whatever country. I mean, I do mean it when I talk about global secular Quranism. And I suppose I have to explain to you that it won't mean a global empire, though nothing precludes any particular nation from establishing empire. I'm just saying that the legal system of secular Quranism would give you a sense of national identity, as well as give rights to your peoples. And I'm basically saying that it has just enough rigidity without sacrificing flexibility and the ability to tailor your the interpretation of the Quran to your particular local needs. So this is really what I'm trying to explain. That it won't mean you losing your identity. And to the Americans, I think the Americans would get the idea. So I've said, because you say theocracy, secular Quranism, and they go crazy and accuse you of wanting to dress them up in Arab clothes and confine their women into black bin bags. And I say, no, not at all. You won't lose your national identity. In fact, if you can imagine America allowing all its 50 states to interpret the Quran in their own way, then you can be damn sure that they'll all be interpreting the Quran in a very distinctive way. The Hawaiians would not be interpreting it in quite the same way as the Texans, for example. So there is going to be a lot of regional variation, and the fact that an American can imagine how differently one state would interpret the Quran from another, I think that would be sufficient information to allow Americans anyway to understand that they won't be losing their national character if they adopted secular Quranism. So obviously I'm saying it's in the national interest to have a moral and legal political system that is actually functioning, and that would restore your patriarchy. And I'm afraid the only way to get it is through invoking a higher power, unless you are particularly confident of just being able to one day soon vote for the national leader that you think is good enough to run your country. I don't see this as in any way likely, because I think every time you vote, the government gets worse, and I think things will get worse if the problem is not addressed. And the problem in itself is liberal democracy and its operation, which is through bribing disparate groups with whatever foolish promises you can manage to keep, and not governing in the national interest, because all these things are harmful. You need to borrow in order to fund all these promises that you do intend to keep, and keeping these promises does not exactly make your people better workers or more useful citizens. So the whole thing's got to change, and I don't regret embarking on this journey of attempting to do this, because it has been said that secular Quranism is a rhetorical device to impress upon Westerners how much radical and fundamental change is required to fix this country, to get it back to where it once belonged. And I guess most people want to go back to the 50s. But of course, I don't have a time machine. Ralph and I did talk about conservatism. And I think I did make the point that conservatism has failed to conserve the national interest, or anything that's worth conserving. It's all been a retreat over the decades, over the centuries, and liberalism has won out. What is liberalism? But why not? Why not do this stupid thing and see how it goes? So now we have transgenderism and gay marriage, and worse is to come, most probably, unless something is done to stop this nonsense. And the only way you can stop this nonsense is to invoke a higher authority. And this atheists refuse to do. And if we are to invoke a higher authority, we have to do it correctly. So while I talk about a higher authority, obviously the best authority would be the highest authority, the supreme authority, and that must be the Abrahamic God. And this would bring you back to the question of Christianity. So Ralph and I did have a heated exchange over the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity, and he was saying that he didn't think it was guilty of idolatry, and I said, fine, obviously you don't, but really you must know that you're outnumbered, because Jews and Muslims are agreed on the oneness of God, and it's only Christians who have this sort of absurd and peculiar idea of God impregnating Mary and then giving birth to himself to save us from him after he has sacrificed himself. It's just too absurd for words. But anyway, if we are to invoke the hypothetical supreme authority, we have to do it right. So I don't know if I managed to impress upon Ralph the question of idolatry, because although he thinks, well, I don't think I'm guilty of idolatry because I think Jesus is God, and I'm saying, okay, you may think Jesus is God, and obviously I'm disagreeing with you, and Jews and Muslims disagree with you, but somebody knows the answer. Somebody will have a view on whether Christianity is idolatry. I mean, somebody who ought to know. And I hope this gives him pause for thought. It's not just a matter of him saying, well, we're more than you, and this is our history, and all that nonsense. And I'm saying, you could still be wrong. You could still be wrong even after 2,000 years of history. Yes, Western achievement has been considerable, but things get used up. Your credit gets used up. And this means that you have to, well, refresh yourself, particularly when you know that your tired old ideas won't really solve your long-standing social problems. And the only way to solve this problem is to change your laws. The only way to change your laws is to engage in political activism. The first step of which is to think of the solution in theory, and you can only get the correct solution in theory if you've worked out the problem. I think I've worked out the problem, and I can't get anyone to discuss it with me because people really don't like discussing ideas. But I do. And I'm saying it's obvious that Christianity is kaput. That's really the source of all your problems. Your corrupt and incompetent politicians are the result of a broken moral system that no longer works, that nobody believes in. So you can have, physical evidence of churches and archbishops of Canterbury and priests and vicars and bishops and all kinds of things. But really, if your leaders are morally rotten, if they don't care about Christianity, if they don't even believe in it, then they have no business being there, and there is no point in having them around at all. You may be sentimental about all these things, but ultimately it serves a purpose. These stone buildings are meant to keep people within its walls for a particular purpose. And before lockdown, the people who most entered these cathedrals would be Chinese tourists. But that doesn't mean it's a living faith. People were forced into believing in Christianity, and this is a tragedy of it all. And I don't think a lot of Westerners understand that their ancestors were forcibly converted to Christianity. And that's why they keep thinking that, if they believed it would work again. No, it won't work again, because going to a different church on a Sunday is not going to change your politics. I know I've said it so many times, but there is only one rational and moral political choice if you want to choose a new religion. And it can't be Hinduism, and it can't be Buddhism, and it can't be Judaism, because you're not Jews. And obviously Christianity is kaput, which is why you're choosing a new religion. It won't be that drastic, I'm not talking about demolishing any ancient church buildings. I am, however, saying that the legal system needs to be changed, the laws need to be changed, and the only way you can change enough of those laws to make a difference within our lifetimes would be to not just change particular rules in a particular rule book, but actually to throw the old rule book out and get a new rule book in. And to do this, I would need the Jews to rank the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws. I would need Christians to repent after they fail to explain how Jesus is God. And for Muslims need to obey the command in chapter 18 verse 4 of the Quran. So this is what I hope will happen in the future. This has clearly not been happening in the past and should be something that Jews, Christians and Muslims ought to be penitent about. So as Ralph accuses me of just being mean to Christians, I have to remind him that Jews are not happy with me for pointing out that they have not been properly teaching the Noahide laws for 2,000 years, and Muslims probably don't like it being pointed out that they have been ignoring the command in chapter 18 verse 4 of the Quran that says, admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son. So basically they're all just as bad as each other. The word of God is pretty clear. I mean, I'm not even a trained theologian, but I've heard of the Noahide laws, I've heard of Rabbi Schneerson, who says it is the duty of Jews to teach the Noahide laws to Gentiles and even use force. So, he really meant it. So unfortunately with rabbis, they don't have much power, and the secular authorities completely ignore them anyway. In Israel and in the West. And there's some whinging about, anti-Semitism, and they feel they have to do something about it. But really, Orthodox rabbis are generally ignored by anyone outside Judaism, or the Jewish, or Jewry, I should say, and they're not going to make much of an impression until and unless they get the support of Muslims, and I hope that Muslims will also make up for their own omission by being more cooperative with rabbis to help them teach the Noahide laws properly, because when they do, when these rabbis rank the 4 Gentile religions properly, then Christianity it will come to light that Christianity is bottom of the heap. Now there will be a few of you who will ask the obvious question, I think, of, well, why did God allow 3 global Christian empires to rise? And I think the answer is quite simple. He can wait 2,000 years easily. It would be like 2 minutes to him, I guess, if he exists. But what's most interesting is how long it would take for people to notice, for Jews. Okay, I think a few Christians over the centuries have been saying, but isn't it idolatry? I mean, what do I see in church? You see idols, statues of Mary and Jesus. That's idolatry. And even if that weren't there, you would still be told by the doctrine of the Trinity, which is based on the Nicene Creed, you would be told to worship Jesus anyway, in your mind, even without, all those idols in churches present with you. In your mind, you're supposed to think of a man with a beard, kind of being nice to you and saying, he'll see what he can do when he talks to his father next time. Something ridiculous like that. So I'm afraid the enormity of the idolatry that you have been practicing, or those of you who really do this sort of thing, I don't think there's anybody now in the chat who is Christian anyway, but I can imagine people saying, how could it be? How can so many generations of our ancestors have been tricked into this? But I do think they would have if they dared ask the question. But then, they would be, shouted down, and inquisitioned or burnt at the stake, and so, eventually the penny drops and you learn not to talk about these things. And this means you don't really understand the concept of idolatry. I mean, it's only important. Idolatry is only important if you wish to entertain the possibility that God might exist and might be irritated, annoyed, infuriated at 2,000 years of idolatry. You might be concerned about that or not. And I'm sure there'll be loads of people who say, well, what's the problem? What's the problem with idolatry? We're not hurting anyone by worshipping our statues. So I'll have to give you a non-divine explanation of why idolatry is bad. And I'm saying there are 5 religions. The 3 of them are no good. So if you follow any of the 3 of them that are no good, you're basically making yourself fall behind the people who do practice the 2 religions that are acceptable to God. Now you're going to say, but the Christians, they did so well. And I'm saying, yes, they did well, and now now they can't bring themselves to believe in the absurdity. They just can't. They're degenerate. They stopped believing in it, I think, since 1791, when the First Amendment was passed. And you think, it's not even the Muslims who destroyed belief in the Trinity. It was the American War of Independence. So it's a kind of own goal for Christianity, isn't it? Because the operation of Christianity in Europe, in the old world, was so horrible that the moment the founding fathers the moment they could throw off the yoke of the doctrine of the Trinity, they did. And they did through chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, which states that there is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error. So there's a certain irony to it. I mean, I know Americans complaining about Muslims now have no idea that the founding fathers were proto-Muslim. I mean, I know they're going to say, oh, but they were just deists. But what is a deist? I'll be very vague because, okay, in the time of the founding fathers, in the late 1700s, they were talking about deism and theism. And basically theists were Christians saying, God gave us these laws and we have to follow them in the Bible, and deists were saying, there must have been a creator, we don't think it's Jesus. I think that's it. I mean, I'm sure a lot, many academic papers could be written about what deism really meant, but I think that's all it meant. It just meant the founding fathers saying, we're not going to be forced into saying that Jesus is God. It's insufferable. That's what they made us do, and we're not doing it anymore because it's absurd. And this would make Adams, Franklin, Jefferson, Madison and Washington proto-Muslim. And there are enough hints already that this is the case. Of course there will be lots of people who don't want to take my point and pretend not to understand. But I think this is a very interesting turn in Western history, isn't it? It's like, well, you'll just have to rewrite your history books after the secular Quranist revolution. So basically the seed of Islam was planted in the American Republic, in the founding of the American Republic, when monarchy and Christianity were rejected. And over the centuries there have been court cases, applications for judicial review about whether America is really a Christian country, and if you read it, it's on Wikipedia, it's Church of the Holy Trinity against the United States government. And the answer seems to be, yes, we are a Christian country, but no, we aren't. So my hope is that however helpless these rabbis think they are and however powerless they think they are, they should be talking about my ideas amongst themselves, and to anyone else who would care to listen. Obviously it would help if they would talk about it in their own. Well, actually, I'd like them to talk to mainstream media, but then, of course, mainstream media will be hostile. But I'm sure they're up to dealing with hostile journalists. So, Muslims also have something to repent, because they just haven't been obeying chapter 18 verse 4 of the Quran, and they may think that the Jews have gone native, but those of them living in the West, it's only a matter of time before they themselves go native. And I was talking to a Muslim, and he's a Gulf Muslim, and he was saying how liberalised the Gulf states are now, because apparently they're hooked on liberalism. I haven't been there, so I don't know really, but I can well believe it. That, I think, is something to do with the Americans bribing certain Gulf state leaders into liberalising, i.e., what's his name? He's got an acronym, but I forget what it is now. You know, the one who had some unfortunate journalist assassinated and disposed of. I think that one. So what do we have to repent of? Well, I think we need to repent of denying and ignoring the truth, really, and refusing to discuss it because it doesn't suit us, because the truth will save you, and it will be lies that will trip you up. So I think that's all I have to say. I'll read the chat now. Keo says, why don't you join the faith and criticise them? You want me to convert to Judaism? I really can't be bothered. Howard Schoonover says, they can just pray to Jesus to forgive them for the sin of worshipping him. That's a good one. Yes, I'm vaccinated, half Galician. I haven't even talked about young women, half Galician. I haven't chided any young women. I don't know what you're saying in Arabic. Abdullah al-Jalal. Yes, I know the Jews want. Okay, they're not going to be. They're not going to offend their Christian overlords, right? That's what I'm saying. Yeah, the Jews will be afraid of offending their Christian overlords, and you know, those of them who do believe in God, you know, will be feeling a twinge of guilt. Because obviously, if they'd done their job properly of teaching the Noahide laws, there wouldn't be any Christian overlords for them to fear. Abdullah Al-Jalal asks, can white Islam be a thing? I don't see why not. Dr. Benkele has clearly watched the video of me and Ralph last night because he's using similar words and similar analogies. Dr. Benkele asks, was it the Christian overlords who had your friend Alison Chablos jailed, or was it Jews? Well, the woman who persecuted her was Jewish, but she's a Reformed Jew. She's not Orthodox. So she's only a half Jew. So, well, I mean, I have explained to you, haven't I, that it's actually the British government who are more invested in the Holocaust, in preventing people from questioning too much the foreign policy of the British government that led up to, well, 2 world wars. They don't really want people to ask too many questions because it was a massive fuck up. on the part of the British government. And if they build Holocaust memorials all over the place, it will stop people from talking about it. I think that's the whole idea of building Holocaust memorials all over the place. I mean, why would people, suddenly get triggered about it, the further away they are from World War II? It makes no sense at all. But what I think the government is trying to do is creating a new national narrative, and I guess it's kind of saying we sacrificed our global empire to save the Jews, and obviously they must know that this would anger Gentile Britons, and but I don't think they even know what they're doing. Because that's the last thing I would do. You build all these Holocaust memorials, and you're just saying, well, you're just inviting them to be vandalized, aren't you? And then you have to be put through the trouble of cleaning up the graffiti and whatever, and it doesn't even make sense. Dr. Langley asks, and which lobby group pushed for Holocaust denial laws, Jews or Christians? Well, I don't know about this. I mean, there are no Holocaust denial laws in the UK, in theory, but, Alison's still in prison because of it. I mean, you see how crazy it is. And that's why I think it's so important that you choose your moral system properly. There are no guarantees, of course. All those Muslims with their caliphates in the past, they also crashed and burnt, and why? They crashed and burnt because they ignored their own rules. The Americans are ignoring their own rules. The British are ignoring their own rules. And sometimes we ignore our own rules, don't we? We break our own rules, and then we suffer inconvenience as a consequence. So I have finished reading the chat. I think I've said all I want to say within, in just over an hour. So I hope that all the Abrahamic faiths will have a little think about what they're supposed to do and what they haven't done, and reflect on the imperative of being governed by the rule of law, without which your society will fall. And obviously, if you're going to have a global empire, you need to govern it through the rule of law, or it just won't continue. I don't see it as something tragic. I think we live in interesting times. Obviously I hope I don't suffer too much inconvenience for any political fallout over this. I still think what I've suggested, the narrative that I have woven, makes complete sense. Obviously, I'm talking about timescales of millennia. But just because Christianity was around for whatever time it was around for doesn't mean it's going to carry on, does it? Past performance is no guarantee of future results. 2,000 years is nothing at all to God if he exists, and 2,000 years is long enough to practice the absurdity of the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity. You can get to heaven if that's what operates on you without having to believe that Jesus is God. And that belief system is based on a better book too. Howard Chinova says, all the people who hopped up on Jesus are the same ones who, if he came back, would be hurling anti-Semitic slurs at him. Oh yes, I was going to say about Holocaust denial, Dr. Mengele. There are Holocaust denial laws in Israel. So even the Israelis are not allowed to deny their own Holocaust. So what is the purpose of Holocaust denial laws? It's to create a new post-war national narrative, which is that of it sounds like the Europeans sacrificed their lives, their empire to protect the Jews, to save the Jews, and you think, well, if I were a Jew, I wouldn't want them to think that, because obviously, people are going to be annoyed about that. People who don't like Jews would not like to think that their governments were stupid enough to start a war, start 2 world wars to save the Jews. But of course it wasn't about saving the Jews. The Jews were only peripheral. What actually happened was Britain and Germany, who were competing empires, fighting each other for supremacy. And Britain didn't have to declare 2 world wars on Germany. So I would say there was something wrong with British foreign policy, and it didn't have to declare war on Germany. I'm sure it would have been all right for Britain to have coexisted with Germany, and in any case, declaring war on Germany would have been un-Islamic. There's no way Islam, the Quran, would have thought it was okay to start World War I and World War II. They were not defensive wars, they were wars of imperial rivalry. And Britain fell into its Thucydides trap twice. And by doing so, it handed its global empire to the Americans, and the Americans are just not grown up enough to run it. And so they're losing their shit and retreating with their fingers burnt. Perhaps to rethink the way they have been governing themselves. There are lots of things that the Americans shouldn't be doing, and there were things that Washington told them a long, long time ago. I do urge Americans, or anyone else interested in this, to read the farewell speech of George Washington. And then, go and think to yourself how many things that George Washington said not to do that they are doing. So it's it's most regrettable, really, that people don't seem to understand the meaning of words or remember what was said. And I know George Washington's farewell speech is read every February in the Senate by a senator, but apparently read without any understanding at all. It's very curious. But then, if people are in a state of, I don't know, amnesia, dementia, degeneracy, then I guess you're not going to get joined up thinking. And why can't you get joined up thinking? It's because they don't believe even in a hypothetical supreme authority. I suppose the reason why I think so clearly is that I can envisage a hypothetical supreme authority that, competing aims have to be prioritised. I'm not claiming that I'm paid come to a correct decision on everything, but the theory is this: if they're competing things, then you have to prioritise one or the other, and you prioritise them by working out which one has to be prioritised, and hopefully those reasons are good reasons, and then you'll eventually get the thing done without disaster. And I don't think our politicians even think in those way. In that way, they only think of their short-term interests. They only think about getting their party elected, and they're not doing anything useful while they are in office. And this is, of course, unsustainable. And okay, if you're tired of me going on like this, then maybe you can Ralph asked me yesterday what would make me stop doing this, and I think the only thing that would make me stop is for somebody senior enough in the Western political establishment to say, yes, we hear you, we got your message, but the answer's yes or no. It doesn't matter. It's really not my... Well, it sort of is my problem, but it's I don't have to make you do anything you don't want to do. I mean, obviously it would be nice if you could just talk it through and work out the best thing to do and care enough to do that in an honest and rational way. But really all I want is a kind of acknowledgement that you've received my message, and then a response about why you are or aren't going to consider my suggestions. That's really all I want. I do have a few followers, Livette. I do. There's actually a blog post that says list of secular Quranists. I really don't see anyone else with a better idea. So I'll just carry on for a bit and see what happens. What's a problem? It keeps you all entertained, doesn't it, anyway?